Making a video game is no easy feat. More so than other mediums, developers have to juggle so many different areas that can just go wrong. From the creative side of things, right down to the guts of the tech that's holding everything up. As a result, we've had plenty of games that are dragged down for one reason or another, but still pick themselves up and endear themselves to players in a big way. With that in mind then, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games that are flawed masterpieces. Number 10, Star Wars Bounty Hunter. The mid-2000s were a great time for Star Wars games, with the likes of Battlefront, LEGO Star Wars, and Knights of the Old Republic all earning legendary reputations during their heyday. Sadly, in such a flooded marketplace, it's always going to be the case that some equally stellar titles are left on the sidelines. And funnily enough, that's exactly where 2002's Star Wars Bounty Hunter finds itself. Released hot on the heels of Jango Fett's debut in Star Wars Episode II Attack of the Clones, Bounty Hunter allows players to take control of the Mandalorian in the criminal underworld, exploring just how the character ended up in the prequels. Now, off the bat, this game is far from perfect. The PS2 version suffers from some pretty subpar visuals and controls, and the missions in combat can veer a little bit too close to the repetitive side. However, you can use your jetpack to fly around levels while dual-wielding blasters, so maybe it's the best game ever made? With imaginative levels, the ability to actually be a bounty hunter during missions, the fact that we haven't had another game like this is criminal. Number 9, Zombie U. Zombie U's poor commercial performance and fairly lukewarm reception not only led to Ubisoft abandoning the Wii U as a platform for exclusives, but has also gone on to be one of the games that people turn to when trying to explain where the system went wrong. And yes, it is certainly true that Zombie U is far from a perfect game. The gamepad was a little bit too hit or miss with how it was implemented, and special shout out goes to those screen-tapping minigames, but what really drew in the criticism was its confusing map design, slow load times, and many glitches. And yes, all of these criticisms are valid, but for players who are able to stomach all of these things, there's actually so much at play with Zombie U that makes it a fun and ultimately terrifying, persistent experience. The zombies in the game are well worth a good scare, the permadeath feature amps up the stakes, and the London setting certainly does its job to creep the player out. The port to PlayStation and Xbox also meant players who actually owned a console that wasn't dead could enjoy it eventually as well, which is always a plus. Number 8, Super Mario Sunshine. GameCube titles like Mario Kart Double Dash, Mario Strikers, and Smash Bros. Melee all came with more vibrant colours and more outlandish animations than Nintendo had ever pumped out before. And the fact that the system launched with Luigi's Mansion rather than an original Mario title was evidence that Nintendo were ripping up the rulebook for this era. And eventually, the GameCube's sole Mario title did release in 2001 with Super Mario Sunshine. Right off the bat, whilst no Mario game ever manages to flop too hard, this is a title that loves to divide opinions. Following Mario on his holiday across Isle Delfino, criticism for the game tends to swing either towards the gimmicky nature of the flood, the dodgy camera, or just how painstaking some of the challenges can be, with the blue coin and floodless levels being especially brutal. Nevertheless, on the other hand, there is a lot of charm and character to Sunshine that arguably no other title has managed to recreate yet. The open world elements from Super Mario 64 are expanded upon to great effect, the wide array of moves capable with FLUDD are really impressive for the time, and the blend of tropical beats, bright visuals, and light-hearted tone make this a real holiday getaway for the ages. Number 7, Siren Blood Curse. Forbidden Siren and its sequel were two of the PS2's best-kept secrets. Developed by Japan Studio, these terrifying survival horror titles would spawn a film, 2 manga adaptations, and eventually a redo of sorts on the PS3. With this release, Siren Blood Curse, visuals and sounds were given a major overhaul on the system's superior technology, breathing new life into Hanuda Village. For some, though, this reimagining strayed too far from the series' roots, but for others it was the perfect entry point, introducing them to a world they didn't even know existed previously. There are a lot of Blair Witch vibes about Blood Curse as well, and the ability to switch between perspectives via sight-jacking adds an incredible amount of depth by being able to view the world through the lenses of another human or the game's own Shibito enemies. It's an incredibly unique and rather nifty way of setting up a survival horror title, and one which we would love to see more of in the genre. Number 6, Crash Twinsanity. For some, Crash Twinsanity marks the point at which one of the 90s' big mascots finally slumped into obscurity. Wrath of Cortex had felt like the most samey game in the series so far, though I still stand by the fact that it absolutely rules, and whilst Twinsanity would certainly attempt a lot more, its polarizing reception meant the franchise would slip out of the big leagues. However, that is partly the game's fault, as it was massively rushed and as such is far from polished, with over 500 glitches being present upon release, and everything from the camera to the controls coming under fire from critics. And yet, in spite of all of these technical shortcomings, there's still so much to enjoy about Twinsanity once these things are looked past. With Cortex playable for some levels and teamwork being so instrumental to the gameplay, the game is packed with great gags and personality. The humor of Cortex's portrayal in particular just feels so right. The visuals finally felt like a genuine upgrade on the 4 games before. The a cappella only soundtrack is a franchise highlight, and the open-world explorative style was the realization of what Mark Cerny had wanted the series to be since Warped. So all in all, it's kinda good stuff. Number 5, LA Noire. Everyone remembers the marketing that went into LA Noire, with developers Team Bondi hammering the drum about their state-of-the-art motion capture technology. With 32 camera angles in tow, these hyper-realistic captures were meant to deliver subtle differences in facial expressions, right down to even the slightest of twitches. And by now we know that the game didn't quite pull off these subtle reactions that were originally intended, but the facial technology was way ahead of its time when it first came out, and still today it looks really impressive considering this came out on the Xbox 360. The fact that the core concept of trying to figure out if people were lying or not worked on this technology is just kind of insane. And at its heart, LA Noire is a brilliant homage to the genre and an often overlooked era of history, in the gaming world anyway, and the depth of the detail that the team put into producing an authentic feeling 1940s recreation of LA, alongside some of the most famous cold cases from the day, does a stellar job of immersing players into this world. Toss this alongside the huge effort in storytelling, solid arcs for the main characters, great performances from half the cast of Mad Men, and a stellar soundtrack recorded from Abbey Road, and there's far more to LA Noire than a few meme-worthy interactions. So forgive the odd wacky tell, which really only adds to the magic anyway, and the Rockstar title is a hell of a fun time. Number 4, Resident Evil 5. Even though its release only came 4 years after Resi 4, Resident Evil 5 feels like a title from an entirely different series, swapping out the gothic setting of a European village in favour of action-packed West Africa. Glossy cinematics, zombies with guns, a new control scheme, and an all-new emphasis on cooperative play between characters Chris and Sheva also ensured that this was Resident Evil's first foray away from its survival horror roots. But whilst the control scheme does have some issues and the gameplay feels more like an arcade shooter than survival horror, the emphasis on blockbuster action doesn't make Resi 5 a bad game at all. In fact, it's far from it. For one, the leap in graphics is staggering, and the pace in which players are thrown from mission to mission makes this an absolutely breathless experience, arguably one that offers more instant replayability than previous games. There's also great variety in boss battles, the return of Jill Valentine and Wesker's outlandishly over-the-top portrayal, and so much more to marvel at. It's short and sweet, but you could do a lot worse in this franchise especially. Number 3, Deadly Premonition. Perhaps the greatest example of a game where the handbrake wasn't even installed to begin with, let alone applied. This homage to the noir genre is a complete mess from top to bottom. From different fonts being used, awful controls, beyond corny dialogue, and a painful frame rate that struggles to even justify this being an actually published title, Deadly Premonition is one of the most polarizing games ever made. And yet, there is a magic about it that you just can't help but give your heart over to. In this game, players have to navigate the gloomy world of Greenvale, solve the mystery of a serial killer at large, and also manage psychic detective Francis York Morgan as he tackles everything from refueling a car to eating a sandwich. It's weird, but it's so unapologetically itself that those who do get to grips with its flaws always end up having a brilliant time. Number 2, Assassin's Creed Revelations. Presented as a dramatic finale for the series' two playable protagonists, Assassin's Creed Revelations was released hot on the heels of its predecessor Brotherhood in 2011. For a series that was just starting to teeter towards a stale, been-there-done-that formula, it was hoped that this crossover between the two legendary assassins would be enough to bow out the Ezio trilogy in a fitting manner. But Revelations actually drew in more of a mixed reception than what most had come to expect from the series at the time, and for me, a player who used to buy every Assassin's Creed at launch, it was just too much of the same too soon. Yet, in the years since its release, Revelations has arguably managed to stand out more and more as an interesting, if slightly flawed game. The Constantinople setting stands out from the previous Italian Renaissance surroundings, the hook blade and zip wires across the city made free running so much more fun, and Ezio even manages to return to his more jovial and charismatic persona than he was in Brotherhood. It's not a game without issues, but the remastered Ezio trilogy version of Revelations in particular does a really sterling job of bringing out the magic Ubisoft buried in there. Number 1, Sonic Unleashed. Context is key when it comes to tackling Sonic Team's 2008 masterpiece. See, Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic 06 unleashed its two major predecessors and almost buried the franchise once and for all. And the game was set for a tough proving ground on an experimental new engine that was called, no joke, the Hedgehog engine. And it's safe to say that Unleashed is about as polarizing a game as anyone could ever likely find. Dedicating half of its time to the never-seen-again Werehog mode, Unleashed's nighttime stages drew in plenty of criticism for its clunky camera, button-smashing combat, and troublesome platforming. But whilst we fully appreciate such a radical change to the Sonic formula was never going to be everyone's taste, the overall look, feel, and themes of Unleashed are undeniably brilliant. The different hub worlds and stages dedicated to different parts of the world made for a perfect homage to the old Sonic Adventure titles, and the Hedgehog engine was able to deliver some of the most exhilarating daytime stages the franchise has seen to date. So, that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think about these flawed masterpieces, and are there any other ones you would have put on here? Let me know, and while you're down there, if you could, please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.